When no contact begins, it doesn't feel dramatic on the surface. There's no explosion, no immediate panic, no instant realization of loss. At first, it feels quiet, almost peaceful. And that's exactly why it's so deceptive, because the first stage of regret doesn't start with pain. It starts with relief. She tells herself this distance is good. She convinces herself she needed space anyway. She frames the silence as strength, independence, clarity. She fills her days with distractions and reassures herself that nothing has really changed. In her mind, she still has access, still has control, still believes the door is open whenever she wants it to be. There's no regret yet, just a subtle sense of comfort in believing she's not losing anything permanent. Then the second stage begins quietly, without permission. Curiosity creeps in. It doesn't announce itself loudly. It shows up in small moments. A pause before opening social media. A thought that arrives uninvited while she's busy doing something else. She wonders what you're doing. She wonders if you're thinking about her. She checks her phone more often than she needs to. She starts to notice the silence more clearly now, not as peace, but as absence. And this curiosity isn't about missing you yet. It's about uncertainty, about not knowing, about realizing that she no longer has access to your inner world. And for the first time, something feels off. That's when the third stage hits, and it's uncomfortable. This is where ego starts to feel threatened. She expected a reaction. She expected resistance, questions, emotion. She expected you to reach out eventually. And when that doesn't happen, it creates a crack in the story she's been telling herself. She starts replaying interactions, looking for signs she missed. She asks herself why you're not chasing, why you're not checking in, why you're not trying to fix things. This stage isn't about love. It's about identity, about being used to mattering in a certain way. And when that familiar validation disappears, it forces her to confront a version of herself she wasn't prepared to see. Then comes the fourth stage. And this is where regret begins to take shape. This is the emotional drop, the moment when curiosity turns into emotional weight. She starts feeling the absence in real ways now. The shared jokes, the emotional safety, the consistency, the way you showed up, the way you listened, the way you made her feel seen without her having to ask. And this is when memory becomes selective. The flaws fade into the background. The conflicts soften, the moments of connection get louder, and regret doesn't arrive as a single thought. It arrives as a feeling, a heaviness, a quiet realization that something valuable might have been taken for granted. The fifth stage is internal conflict, and it's exhausting. This is where she goes back and forth with herself constantly. One moment she feels regret, the next she defends her choices. One moment she misses you deeply, the next she reminds herself why things didn't work. She argues with herself in her own head. She seeks validation from friends, but filters the story in a way that protects her pride. She wants reassurance without accountability. She wants comfort without vulnerability. And this inner tug of war creates emotional fatigue. Because deep down, she knows something was lost. But admitting that fully would mean admitting responsibility. And that's not easy. Then comes the sixth stage. And this one is dangerous because it's driven by fear of permanence, fear that the silence means you've truly moved on, fear that the connection she thought was always available is no longer there. This is when she might feel the urge to reach out, not necessarily to reconcile, but to test, to see if she still matters, to see if the door is still open. This stage isn't always about love either. It's about reassurance, about calming the anxiety that comes from losing control over the narrative. And when she realizes that you're not easily accessible anymore, that fear intensifies into something much deeper. The seventh stage is acceptance mixed with regret, and it doesn't always look the same for everyone. For some, it becomes quiet reflection. For others, it becomes delayed accountability. This is where she finally understands the weight of the silence, that no contact wasn't punishment. It was consequence. It was the natural result of actions, choices, patterns that went unaddressed. And this realization doesn't always lead to reconciliation. Sometimes it leads to growth. Sometimes it leads to sadness. Sometimes it leads to a deeper understanding of what she lost and why. But the regret here is no longer reactive. It's reflective. It's the kind that lingers, not loudly, but persistently. What's important to understand is that regret doesn't follow a straight line. She may move back and forth between these stages. She may get stuck in one longer than another. But no contact forces something powerful, self-awareness. It removes the distractions, the noise, the emotional cushioning. It creates space where truth can surface. And that truth isn't always comfortable. It challenges narratives. It exposes blind spots. It highlights value that was once overlooked. And while all of this is happening internally for her, something else is happening externally for you. You're reclaiming your emotional energy. You're breaking patterns. You're choosing self-respect over reaction. And that's why no contact works the way it does. Not because it manipulates regret, but because it allows reality to settle in without interference. It allows emotions to evolve naturally. It allows both people to face themselves without distraction. Regret, when it comes, isn't about losing you alone. It's about losing the version of herself that felt secure, valued, and emotionally grounded in your presence. It's about realizing that some connections don't announce their importance until they're gone. And by the time that realization fully lands, the silence has already done its work, and the silence continues to stretch, and with time, silence becomes something heavier than words ever were. Because words can be argued with, misunderstood, twisted, or dismissed. But silence forces reflection. Silence forces someone to sit alone with their thoughts without the ability to reach out and immediately soothe discomfort. And in this extended quiet, she begins to notice details she once ignored. The patience you showed when conversations became difficult. The way you stayed consistent when emotions fluctuated. The stability you offered when her feelings were uncertain. These realizations don't arrive as one overwhelming wave. They come in fragments. A memory here, a feeling there, a sudden emotional reaction to something small that reminds her of what she lost. She starts comparing without meaning to. She notices how interactions with others feel different. Conversations may feel shallow compared to the depth she once had. Attention from others may feel exciting at first, but it lacks familiarity. And familiarity carries comfort. Comfort carries safety. Safety carries emotional trust. And when those layers are missing, she begins to recognize that what she once considered ordinary was actually rare. But regret grows quietly. It rarely screams. It whispers through contrast, through moments where she feels something missing, but can't immediately explain why. As time moves forward, her mind begins to reconstruct the relationship differently. When emotions are active, people often remember conflict more than connection. But distance changes memory. Distance filters experiences through longing instead of frustration. She starts remembering how you supported her during difficult times, how you celebrated her wins, how you understood her silence when she couldn't find words. And as these memories resurface, they carry emotional weight because they are no longer available in the present. They exist only in recollection, and recollection has a way of magnifying value. There comes a moment when she starts questioning her own decisions more seriously, not in a defensive way anymore, but in a reflective way. She replays certain arguments, certain reactions, certain moments where she pulled away emotionally. And she starts noticing her own patterns. Maybe she recognizes moments where she expected you to mind, read her feelings. Maybe she sees times where she withdrew instead of communicating. Maybe she realizes she assumed you would always be there regardless of how she responded. And self-awareness like this doesn't feel empowering at first. It feels uncomfortable because it removes the comfort of blaming external circumstances and replaces it with personal accountability. During this period, loneliness can feel different from simply being alone. Being alone is physical, loneliness is emotional. She may still have people around her, friends, family, social circles. But emotional loneliness appears when she realizes that connection and presence are not the same thing. She begins to miss emotional safety more than companionship. She misses feeling understood without having to explain herself constantly. She misses the feeling of being accepted in moments when she wasn't perfect. And when emotional loneliness sets in, regret deepens because she begins to understand that emotional compatibility is not easily replaceable. At times, pride tries to interrupt this process. Pride reminds her of moments she felt hurt. Pride reminds her of reasons she justified distance. Pride encourages her to protect her ego by minimizing the relationship's importance. But pride weakens over time when emotional truth becomes stronger, because pride thrives in reaction while regret grows in reflection. And reflection is difficult to silence once it starts. She may begin checking your life indirectly, looking for signs of whether you've moved forward, whether you're happier, whether someone else has entered your world. And these observations can trigger another emotional shift. If she senses that you are emotionally stable without her, it challenges the narrative that she was irreplaceable in your emotional life. And this realization can be both painful and awakening. Painful because it forces her to face loss. Awakening because it forces her to recognize the importance of mutual effort in maintaining connection. Another layer of regret appears when she begins recognizing the emotional labor you carried. She may recall moments where you were the one initiating conversations, resolving tension, offering reassurance, maintaining closeness. And when she reflects on those patterns, she might start to see imbalance she once overlooked. She may realize that stability often looks invisible when someone consistently provides it. People tend to notice emotional support most when it disappears. And once that support is gone, its value becomes impossible to ignore. There are nights when these thoughts become louder. Nighttime has a way of amplifying emotional reflection because distractions fade. In the quiet of night, Memories feel closer, regret feels heavier, questions feel louder. She might scroll through old conversations, replay voice notes, revisit pictures that carry emotional energy. And each memory carries dual emotion: warmth because of what was shared, pain because it no longer exists in the same form. Nostalgia becomes a mixture of gratitude and loss, and that mixture can be emotionally overwhelming. Eventually, she begins to recognize that no contact wasn't simply absence. It was transformation. It forced emotional independence on both sides. It removed reliance on familiar emotional patterns. And this realization can shift her understanding of love itself. She may start realizing that love isn't sustained by feelings alone. It's sustained by effort, consistency, communication, patience, and emotional maturity. And recognizing this after losing someone creates a very specific kind of regret. The regret of learning lessons too late to apply them where they mattered most. There may be moments where she contemplates reaching out, not impulsively, but thoughtfully. She may rehearse messages in her mind, imagining different responses you might give. She might question whether enough time has passed, whether you would be receptive, whether reopening communication would bring closure or reopen wounds. And this internal dialogue becomes intense because it balances vulnerability against fear of rejection. Reaching out requires humility. It requires acknowledging that silence revealed things she didn't want to see before. And humility is emotionally difficult when pride has been protective for so long. Sometimes she doesn't reach out. Sometimes regret becomes something she carries privately, something that influences future relationships. She might become more aware, more communicative, more emotionally present with someone new. But part of her emotional growth may always trace back to what she lost with you. And that creates a quiet gratitude mixed with sadness. Because growth gained through loss carries emotional complexity. It teaches lessons that feel valuable but expensive. In certain moments, she might start to understand you more deeply than she did when you were present. Distance often clarifies personality traits and emotional intentions. She may realize that your boundaries weren't rejection. They were self-respect. She may realize that your patience wasn't weakness. It was emotional strength. She may realize that your consistency wasn't predictability. It was reliability. And these reinterpretations reshape how she remembers you. They shift her perspective from focusing on temporary emotional conflicts to recognizing long-term emotional value. Regret also evolves into self-questioning about timing. She might wonder whether things could have been different if she had been emotionally ready earlier. Whether maturity, communication, or vulnerability could have changed outcomes. And these questions rarely have clear answers. They exist as reflections rather than resolutions, but they deepen emotional understanding, even if they don't change the past. As time continues, she may experience moments of acceptance layered with lingering emotion. Acceptance doesn't erase regret. It simply allows her to carry it without constant emotional resistance. She learns to live with the understanding that some connections are chapters that shape who we become, even if they don't remain permanent. She learns that emotional presence is fragile when taken for granted. She learns that silence can teach lessons conversations never could. And these lessons settle quietly into her identity, influencing how she approaches vulnerability, communication, and emotional responsibility moving forward. And even when life moves forward, certain memories remain emotionally vivid. Not because she refuses to let go, but because meaningful connections leave permanent emotional imprints. There may be songs that remind her of specific moments, places that trigger emotional recall, words or phrases that carry echoes of conversations you once had. And these reminders don't always cause pain. Sometimes they cause reflection. Sometimes they cause appreciation. Sometimes they cause a soft, unspoken regret that exists without needing expression. No contact doesn't just create distance between two people. It creates distance between who someone was and who they become after reflection. It forces emotional evolution without negotiation. It reveals the difference between attachment and appreciation. It exposes the value of emotional effort. And within that transformation, regret becomes less about losing a person and more about understanding the depth of what was shared only after it's no longer accessible. And even after all this internal shifting, there are moments when she surprises herself by how deeply certain emotions still surface. She may think she has processed everything, that she has moved forward mentally, that the chapter is closed. But healing isn't linear, and regret doesn't follow a schedule. It reappears unexpectedly, during moments of vulnerability, during times when life feels uncertain, during moments when she needs emotional grounding and realizes that the person who once provided that is no longer there. And that realization doesn't always bring tears. Sometimes it brings stillness. A quiet pause where she simply acknowledges what was lost without trying to change it. She may start noticing how her emotional responses have changed because of the absence, how she's more cautious now, how she hesitates before opening up fully, how she evaluates emotional availability more carefully. And while this growth can be healthy, it's also rooted in experience. Experience shaped by the realization that emotional safety isn't guaranteed, and that connections require nurturing. And somewhere deep inside, she knows that this awareness was forged through the loss of something meaningful. There are moments when she wonders if you ever think about her the same way. Not out of entitlement, but out of curiosity. She wonders whether the silence affected you too, whether you also had to face difficult truths, whether you also grew in ways she can't see. And this curiosity isn't about reopening the past. It's about understanding the emotional impact of shared history, because shared history doesn't disappear just because communication stops. It lives in memory, in emotional patterns, in the way people approach future relationships. She may also realize that no contact stripped away illusions. Illusions about endless chances. Illusions about emotional safety being permanent without effort. Illusions about time always being available to fix things later. And when those illusions dissolve, regret becomes more grounded, less dramatic, more mature. It becomes an understanding rather than a reaction. An understanding that some opportunities don't repeat themselves, not because people don't care, but because circumstances change and growth redirects paths. At times, she might catch herself imagining alternate versions of events, imagining conversations that could have gone differently, imagining responses she wishes she had given, imagining moments where vulnerability could have replaced defensiveness. These imagined revisions don't necessarily mean she wants to go back. They mean she has learned, and learning often involves replaying the past with new awareness. It's painful, but it's also how emotional intelligence develops. She might begin recognizing that love is not just about how someone makes you feel, but about how you make someone else feel too. About reciprocity, about emotional presence, about consistency during discomfort, not just during ease. And when she reflects on these aspects, regret becomes less about missing affection and more about recognizing imbalance. Recognizing where effort could have been more evenly shared. Recognizing where emotional availability could have been stronger. There are moments when gratitude enters the picture alongside regret. Gratitude for what the connection taught her. Gratitude for the growth that followed. Gratitude for the emotional depth she experienced, even if it didn't last forever. And this gratitude doesn't cancel regret. It softens it. It allows her to hold the memory with respect rather than resentment. It allows her to appreciate the role the relationship played in shaping her emotional maturity. She may also begin to understand that no contact was an act of self-respect rather than punishment. That it was not designed to create suffering, but to create clarity. And understanding this reframes the entire experience. It removes the narrative of abandonment and replaces it with the narrative of boundaries. And boundaries, when understood correctly, are expressions of self-worth. Realizing this can bring a mix of admiration and sadness. Admiration for the strength it took to walk away. Sadness for not recognizing that strength sooner. Sometimes she wonders if timing was the real issue, if emotional readiness didn't align, if growth happened on different timelines. And while these questions don't always lead to answers, they deepen her understanding of relationships as dynamic experiences rather than fixed outcomes. They help her accept that not all meaningful connections are meant to last forever. But all meaningful connections leave something behind. She may notice that future relationships feel different because of this experience. She might communicate more clearly. She might value consistency more. She might recognize red flags earlier or appreciate green flags more deeply. And while she may never explicitly attribute these changes to you, the influence remains. Quiet, subtle, embedded in her emotional decision making. And that influence is a form of legacy. Not dramatic, not visible, but real. There are also moments when she allows herself to grieve properly. Not just the person, but the future she imagined, the plans that were discussed, the possibilities that felt real at the time. Grieving those imagined futures is an important part of healing, and it often happens long after the separation itself, because the mind holds onto potential just as tightly as it holds onto reality, and letting go of potential requires acceptance, which takes time. As acceptance deepens, regret becomes less consuming. It no longer dominates her thoughts daily. It becomes something she understands rather than something she resists. It informs her choices rather than haunting them. And this transformation doesn't erase emotion. It integrates it. It allows her to move forward without denying the past. And even then, there may be moments of softness. Moments when she smiles at a memory instead of feeling pain. Moments when she acknowledges that something beautiful existed, even if it ended imperfectly. Moments when she silently wishes you well, not because she wants to return, but because she respects what was shared. And that respect is often the final form of regret. Not longing, not sorrow, but recognition. Recognition that some connections change us in ways we don't fully understand until they're gone.